Hello and welcome to Madam Speaker by Hilmer's Network, the podcast taking a deep dive with the female candidates in the up-and-coming federal election. And today I'm joined by the Liberal candidate for the federal seat of Lyons, Susie Bower. Susie, thank you so much for coming into the studio today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So off the bat, I wanted to start with Olympic fever because you yourself have been a competitive athlete before. I wanted to know if you've kind of caught the bug of the Olympic fever.
Oh, my God, how can you not?
Yeah.
There's so many good stories there. Starting with Grace, obviously, road, individual time trial, first one for Australia there, being retiring as well at the end of the year. So, you know, what a great way to go out, right on top.
Totally.
And then obviously being a very proud Tasmanian, can't go past Ariane Titmus.
No.
2 gold medals, backed up her gold from last year, last Olympics as well. So, you know, we've got to support our Tassie people, but I also have a real soft spot for Saya. Like who could not buy into that story, right?
So do I.
Like that is just the emotional roller coaster for her is just tremendous.
And we should mention that we are talking about Saya Sakakibara.
Yeah.
Which I went down a massive rabbit hole. I spent pretty much all of my Saturday in bed watching different videos and documentaries about her because that story is just insane and it is one of my favourites.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, it's been so good. It's been so nice to like wake up in the morning and get all of the alerts of all the medals we've won.
Yeah, definitely. And it was great this morning because it was the team's pursuit for the men.
It was the absolute best. So tell me a little bit about your own history and your own kind of background with sport and with cycling.
Yeah, so I actually started cycling when I was 20. I went along to a Sports Carnival Association of Tasmania event.
Is 20 late for that?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I was like, do cyclists usually start, you know?
They usually start as juniors and work their way through. I went to an event, thought that looked like fun. I was always a bit of a sporty person, you know, as I was growing up. And I was looking for something else to do. I just moved back to help my parents out with their shop. And I was like, look, what else can I do on the side? And I went along and I thought, oh, that track cycling looks like fun. So I got myself a bike and the bunch called me Autumn Leaves when I first started because I kept falling off. So it's very
sweet.
It's very difficult to follow a wheel when you've never had those skill sets before. Yeah. And we trained at nighttime, right? So
I would be an autumn leaf too.
Yeah, so I learned to bounce a fair bit in the early days. But then within 6 months, I did my first state championship on the road and I actually came third. So I won a bronze medal within 6 months. Yeah, so that kind of got the bug. And then once I had the bug, I kept going. And then I ended up representing Tasmania 5 times. So twice on the road, 3 times on the track. My best result was 6th in Australia for the point score, 7th in Australia for the individual pursuit. And I actually repeated that 2 years in a row, and then I retired.
Yeah, out with a bang.
Yeah. Well, I think I crossed the finish. I still remember it very clearly, and it was in Western Australia, and crossed the finish line in the points race, and it was the hardest points race I'd ever done in my life, and I was just spent, and I just went, I think I've had enough. And I was 26 by then, so it was like, I've got to also earn a living.
Yes. Yeah, which is very hard for athletes as well once you're at a professional level. If you're doing so much sport and you have to work on top of that, it's so difficult. Do you think that many athletes, that kind of complete epiphany or that sense of peace that you had to quit, do you think that many athletes get that, or do you think it's a little bit more of an internal conflict before they come to that conclusion?
I think it really depends on the individual. For me, it was I was quite calm about it. It was my time. And then but you know, you always look back and go, because the person that I was riding beside my whole career, the following year, she hit the jackpot, right? And she went and became a 3-time national champion. And I'm like, oh, and she was the same age as me as well. And I was like, I wonder what would happen if I'd stayed another year. But anyway.
Did you dwell on that? Like, do you think about that kind of what if or?
No, I found that I've transferred that into my working life.
Yeah.
So, you know, everything that I had, because I would say I was not a talented cyclist, right? But by gee, I was a hard worker. So I had the work ethic and I would get it done. And I've transferred that now into my career.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because there's a crazy statistic. Something like 75% of female bosses had a sporting background. And I played a lot of netball. I wasn't as good as you were at cycling, but it was truly foundational, like to the person that I became and the skill set that I have. So much of that was formed in netball. And I just think it's not discussed really enough about the skills that you get and the benefit it can have to your career and to other things as well.
Yeah. Team building, communication skills, work ethic,
resilience.
All of these things translate straight into the work environment. Thank goodness, because at 26 without earning anything, I need to get a job. So luckily they did transfer.
Yeah, thank God. So for those so you said you started at 20 and 26 was when you retired. Yeah. So a fairly kind of short, truncated period. Were you working throughout that period or were you just focused on cycling?
I was working part-time with my parents. So I had the flexibility of doing that because training was during the day. A lot of training once I became really serious was then during the day because we would have to do, up to 1,000 kilometres per week. So you actually, so we were doing 200K rides, 150K rides during the winter season to build up for the track season in the summer. So you've got to do that real base work because both the individual pursuit and the point score are endurance races. Yeah. So you need that base, that endurance base, and then and then you work on it. You've got to do gym work as well as that. So, when you get into summer, you're doing gym sessions, you're doing 2 or 3 track sessions, and you're doing road riding. Yeah. So
I'll go back to, your work that you were doing with your parents in a little bit, but you also spent some time in the US cycling as well. What was that like?
That was amazing. So I spent two months over there with 5 other Aussies and we rented a little place. So we were doing criteriums and track racing and we were in Allentown in Pennsylvania. We actually rented a place together and it was opposite a crematorium. That was probably why it was cheap. But it was the 90s, so, but we were poor.
Sounds uplifting.
Yeah.
Right. Well, beautiful view.
We did get some, smells every now and then. But, we were poor as well. So, but we needed a vehicle to get to the races, right? So we bought a vehicle for like $80 each. The only catch was it didn't have reverse, right? So every time we went to a race, we had to sort of park. It did have a park brake, which was great. So we put it on an incline.
Oh, what a luxury.
We put it on an incline so that it would roll back so that we could get out.
Oh, my God.
And my job in the house was to actually do the grocery shopping, right?
Yes.
And Allentown has a lot of Amish community there, which was fantastic to be involved with. Yeah. So usually when you went to the supermarket, you were parking next to a horse and cart, basically. So it was kind of cool.
What an experience.
Yeah. But I remember this one time I went by myself and I went up to the intersection and I stopped and I was turning. And this truck was coming around the intersection and I thought, oh, my God, he's not going to be able to get around the intersection, right, because I'm right up the front.
Yep.
Sure enough, to my right, there's a construction site with a whole bunch of guys working on construction. The truck comes round. He can't get round. He's telling me to back up.
And you're like, I don't have reverse.
So he's honking his horn. The whole intersection is now blocked, right? No. And I'm sitting there going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I can hear the guys on the construction site going, put it in reverse, you stupid blonde. And I'm like, in the end, I just got out of the car and the truck driver got out of the truck. And I said, I'm really sorry. I don't have reverse in the vehicle. And he laughed his head off and he called over to the construction guys and he goes,
they all
she
pushed
hasn't
you
got
back.
reverse. And he said they thought it was the funniest thing. They all came over, pushed the car back so the truck could get around and off we went.
Oh, my God. That is amazing. What a story. I love
to do with the cycling, but
to do with the whole experience. Yeah. And I just those memories that you'll have from that is just, such a fun experience to live with all of those Aussies over there.
Brett Aitken was actually one of them that I was flatting with. So it was really good to be with someone of his calibre as well and skill set.
And so then obviously you came home to Australia and made the decision to quit cycling. And now you're kind of in politics. So you ran at the last selection. You got a 3% swing towards you, which is great. And now what's your margin?
0.9%.
very tight.
So it's the second most marginal seat for Labor now in Australia.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And so at what point in your life, because it doesn't really sound like you kind of grew up surrounded by politics, at what point did you decide that this was something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, so I actually spent 9 years in local government as on the employment side, as a director of community and economic development. And that got me interested in the politics. And as we know, local government is the grassroots, right? It's closest to the people. It's where I believe you can still have a really powerful impact on communities and helping with community work and things like that. So that's where I got interested. When I actually left that role and went into university lecturing, I ran for local government elections in where I lived because I didn't work where I lived. When I was working for local government, and got elected, got the second highest vote as a first timer, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then I had a friend on council with me, and she was a Liberal member.
Yeah.
I wasn't affiliated with a party at that stage in 2018. And she said, look, I think you really should have a shot here. You should join the Liberal Party, and your values align with the party's. Everything about you aligns. Like, why don't you have a go? And I was like, okay. And the rest is history. Thank you to her.
So now you're running for the federal seat of Lyons, which is in Tasmania. Tell me a little bit about, like, where exactly is Lyons? Like, what towns would have I heard of that are in Lyons?
Yeah.
And kind of what does the seat look like? Is it an agricultural kind of seat, or?
It is highly agricultural, yeah. So it's very rural based.
What sort of ag? Like what sort of?
Yeah, so all ag. So, crop as well as fruit, horticulture, as well as livestock, so beef and cattle and sheep. Beef and cattle, same thing. Sheep. So pretty much the whole spectrum of ag wherever we go. But it goes from Lower Barrington, which is right next to Braddon, right on the border of Braddon, so just past Sheffield, right down to Port Arthur, right down to the very end of the south, so right from the northwest down to the south, all of the Central Highlands and all of the East Coast. So
it's a big mama.
It is, it's a bit over 33,000 square kilometres.
I might pronounce it wrong. Where's Wineglass Bay?
Yeah, so that's
is
in
it?
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I've done that hike.
Yeah.
What's that peninsula, Frank?
So that's all the Bay of Fires area. Yeah. So that's the whole coastline. Yeah. So that goes right down from Bennelong Bay, right down the coastline to where you're talking about.
Freycinet?
Yeah, Freycinet.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I was going to pronounce it wrong.
No, Freycinet is definitely right.
There's this epic lobster shack. Yeah, it was. I went to Freycinet, did Wineglass, the hike, and we got this epic lobster roll. It was a town that started with B. Is there like a Bichino? Bichino.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
that down on the water's edge?
Yes.
Yeah. No, they are very well known for their, well, pretty much Tassie's known for its fresh seafood, right? But Lyons, because we have that whole East Coast area, we have a lot there. Tribunna's another great fishing spot as well.
So what's your favourite thing to do in the seat?
In Lyons, I actually love the riding where I live in Westbury because it's flat. Right?
So you still do ride?
Yeah, I ride every week with the Meander Valley Vets. But that's more a coffee and a giggle.
Nice.
It's very relaxing.
Social.
Yeah, very social. And I think you need that outlet as well, You need some exercise, I believe, still in your life. Just doing corporate stuff, it can get quite stressful. So you need to – I find if I'm not exercising, I get a little crabby.
Yes. But there's also like people say there's like different types of relaxing, and one of them might be meditating or reading books, or – some of them's exercising, and then there's actually nothing like laughter.
Yeah.
Like I feel like when you've had a good giggle with people, that's a different form of relaxation altogether, but it really fills your cup. It's a really good circuit breaker.
Yeah.
So that's good.
And, they're very non-political, right?
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have.
Which is good too.
So I still remember my best friend, and she still rides with me, and she was like, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's fine.
That is fine.
Just listen.
I actually think that people in politics need to be surrounded by people that aren't in politics because you just get too close to it. You get stuck in the weeds. So you really need that perspective and people who are like, sometimes I think in politics, like I've had experiences where I'm like, this is the biggest deal ever. And I'll go and speak to a friend and they'll be like, oh, like what's that? And I'll be like, okay. It's the biggest news in my life, but not in yours. So.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice actually to have that sounding board as well, to where you can actually say stuff and they have no idea who you're talking about or what it's about, but they'll give you an opinion, which is great.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what your childhood looked like, where you grew up.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little place called Chudley. Chudley, just outside of Deloraine.
Such a cute name.
It is, Chudley, and it's only about a population of 150. Wow. 150 to 200, so very small, on a farm. We had 4 generations under the one roof.
4?
Yep. So I had my great-grandfather, my grandfather and grandmother and my mum and I.
That's a record.
Yeah.
Because you hear sometimes like 3 generations being in one house. 4.
No, we had the 4 there and we had my uncles there as well. So my mum's got 4 brothers. So
it's like a working commune.
Yeah. So family's very important to me, having been brought up that way. But we left the farm when I was 3 and moved into town, which was Deloraine, which was 15 minutes away. And that's a population about 2,500. So again, not a huge population.
Yeah.
And that's where I grew up basically. So mum worked at the hospital. Dad was the AMBO. So I used to go down to the hospital. So back, in those days, you're allowed into the hospital. Yeah. I used to help the cook do all the meals for the hospital. So that's who taught me actually how to do a roast.
Oh, yeah? It's a very important skill set.
It's a very important skill set.
Do you pride yourself on your roast?
I do a really good roast.
Do you? What roast is it?
Lamb mostly,
Great
but choice. I can do pork as well with the crackle. She told me how to do the crackle well.
Knowing how to do pork crackle is like one of the biggest keys of life. Yep. It's like you've really cracked the code.
Yeah.
So good for you. Does it involve rubbing vinegar?
Yes, it does.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Malt vinegar, actually.
Malt vinegar.
The malt vinegar, yeah.
Hot tip, love it. So, you were kind of at school and helping out in a hospital, doing bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And then kind of what was the next kind of?
So in Tassie, school finishes at year 10. So you finish high school at year 10, which was Deloraine High, and then I went to Launceston College. So then I had to travel into Launceston on a bus an hour each way to do year 11 and 12.
Yeah.
And then once I'd finished college, I went to Hobart to do uni. I did a law arts degree in my first year.
Was that a pretty natural calling to do that degrey?
Not really. My first thing that I really wanted to be was a doctor, probably because of mum and dad's background. But I found I wasn't any good at science, so they kind of got killed pretty early. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, what do I do now? And then I thought, oh, law might be all right. So I went down that path, got in. Of course, you needed credits or above to go to second year law. I didn't achieve that. So I was like left with second year uni with an arts degree and I was like, oh, okay, what do I do now? So left with not really knowing where my career might go at that stage because it was, I'd been concentrating so long on getting into law and then I did that. And it didn't work out. And I was like, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah, you don't have that second plan.
No, I didn't.
How old would have you been then?
So I was 19 then. Yeah.
Okay. And so what did you do?
So I just finished I finished my second year and then my parents asked me in my third year to go and help them in their business. So that was an easy decision to go, look, I'll just finish the degree by distance and go up there and help them.
What were they doing at that point?
So it was just a takeaway shop up in East Devonport.
What sort of takeaway?
Just sandwiches and, cordial, lollies and just a small little and, the odd confectionery, what's it called? Little supermarket thing,
condiment type stuff. And,
just little
burgers.
No, we didn't do burgers. So it was nothing hot food at that time. So we didn't do hot chips or anything like that, but just sandwiches and rolls. And it was mainly for the workforce that was around the area. Yeah.
And did you like that?
I loved it. Yeah. That's where I learned how to talk to people and serve people basically because that's what you're doing all day, So, and that's where I learned when you get people with perhaps their manners aren't quite there, how to deal with those individuals.
Have you figured that out? Because I would like to know. I don't know that I've figured that out yet.
Yeah.
So you do have like some really fantastic experience kind of in an executive level. Talk me through some of the roles that you've done.
Yeah, so when I actually came back to Tasmania, I went to the University of Tasmania at Burnie, at the Burnie campus, and I was part of the team to establish the Institute for Regional Development there.
Yeah.
And as part of that, when I came back, I'd been away for nearly 9 years.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have any connections. And before that, I had cycling, right? So a lot of people that I went to school with, I had no connection with. And Tassie's so networked, right?
Yeah.
It's very networked and relationship-based. And I struggled a little bit with that, having been away for so long, and how to reconnect back into my hometown.
Yeah.
And so I actually started the Young Professionals Network as part of that, and that's been going for 14 years now.
Wow,
and it's still going really strong. So, and that was my way to try and connect with where I was in my life at that stage, and making new connections in Tassie, so that you can actually make those relationships.
And I guess so the 9 years you mentioned that you weren't in Tassie till, I think it was it?
Yeah, I went to Sydney. So I lived in DY in Sydney, and pretty much I was working 2 jobs just to pay the rent.
Yeah.
So
what were the 2 jobs?
I was working as an admin assistant at that stage for Mitter Copiers in Lane Cove, and working at a bakery in DY on the weekend as well. And I was like, this doesn't quite cut it for me.
Did you like Sydney?
I loved it. I love DY. It's a beautiful area. You can't get past it, but I was just like, there's got to be something else. Yeah, it's a lot at this stage.
So how long were you in Sydney for?
I was only there for 6 months, and then I moved to Melbourne.
Right.
And I ended up staying in Melbourne for nearly 8.5 years,
And did you love Melbourne?
I did love Melbourne, I don't quite get the Sydney-Melbourne thing.
I was just about to say, you are very diplomatic in I like Sydney and I like Melbourne, but it's so no one ever does that. They're like, yes, I like this one more. I also love Sydney and love Melbourne.
Yeah.
They're just so different to each other. They offer different things.
Yeah.
So what were you doing in Melbourne?
So Melbourne is, I did a few odd jobs to start with, and then got back into the university sector, and then I was in student recruitment.
Oh, yeah.
So I worked for the Australian Catholic University in student recruitment. So I travelled around Victoria for 5 years, talking to Year 12 students about, obviously you're wanting, there were 8 universities within a 20K radius, and we were all competing for the highest achieving scores for students to come to our university. So it was quite competitive amongst us all to try and get those students to come to our university. But that meant I started public speaking. So that was actually crowds of 600 Year 12 students, mind you. They're a tad different than normal audiences as well. So if you can capture Year 12s for an hour and a half,
that's tough.
When there's 600 of them, and we didn't always achieve that. But, this is where doing that every day for basically 5 years.
That requires a lot of energy. And it just, to connect with them, that requires so much hype.
It does.
It's hard to keep their attention.
It is very much so,
So after all of that time, did you, when you were living in Melbourne for such a prolonged period, did you always know that you're going to go back to Tassie?
Not really. I had a couple of relationships, and my last relationship broke up, and I was a little bit lost after that. And I just went, I think I need to come home. And so that's when I made the decision to go home.
Seems almost like the clarity that you had when you crossed the finish line in WA of I
think it's a really key thing for anyone to know when it's time for you to move on. And I'll talk, when I then left Burnie and went to Dorset as in local government, and then did the Blue Derby mountain bike trails. So I was the project manager for that. Now, they have now the reputation of one of the best mountain bike trails in the world. And to be able to be part of that and start that process. But also I knew I was a manager for the first 20K. We launched that. We opened it. I did all the branding, all of that work, setting everything up. But I also knew I wasn't the person to take it to the next level either.
So you're on a nice edge of less than 1%, as we discussed before. If you were to get into Parliament, what would your priorities be? And you could just kind of name a couple of them.
Yeah, so in Lyons in particular, obviously I've been doing a bit of door knocking around Lyons. We do have...
Sorry, just as a small side tangent, how long have you been endorsed for?
Nearly 2 years,
That is insane. That is such a long time to be campaigning.
I feel it is the longest job interview known to man.
Yeah. So yeah,
I still don't have a result yet. Yeah. I've still got to wait.
You've knocked on some doors. You've done some Ks. Yeah.
But I do have to say, though, having run previously, if you didn't continue on, you get forgotten really quickly, right?
Yes.
So if you're going to be serious about it, you do need to keep it moving. Yeah. You need that. You got a bit of momentum in the first one. You need to keep that going. So I think that was the key. And look, if I didn't achieve the primary vote that I'd achieved, I might have thought twice about standing again. But achieving that, I was like,
you did so well.
I'm like, it's worth another crack.
So I sidetracked you there, but you were talking about your priorities, and you were saying that you've been doing so much door knocking, which is.
Yeah, so it's not dissimilar for anywhere in Australia, though, GP access. You know, we need to be looking at programs around that and long-term solutions as well around GPs, but that's not new. But it's things that are quite specific. The Southeast Irrigation Scheme for the southern part of Lyons is critical. So that's a $300 million scheme. It's actually one that I think has a fantastic business model, because they ask for 50% from the federal, 25% from state and 25% from the growers. Yeah. So they get buy-in from the actual by doing water sales prior to it. So the first two have been committed. Unfortunately, the other one hasn't yet, but that's something that is critically important for our future. I think we don't always place enough importance on food security. Yeah. And Tassie is a food bowl. It produces so much of Australia's food and that we export, and we need to protect that and be able to grow our ag base as well. Yeah. The other one is around digital connectivity. You know, how can you work in a rural, how can you have options for people to work in rural areas if they can't get online, if they can't connect to?
Which is like, post-COVID and post a lot more people in the city working from home, it's actually leveled the playing field a lot for people who live in rural and regional areas, that they can apply for jobs that they wouldn't have been able to before.
Definitely. And we have seen, we actually saw quite a lot of mainlanders, particularly Tasmanians, coming home during COVID.
I bet.
Yeah, to work and they can work from home. And it did change people's mindset, I think, in a leadership fashion, so that they could say, oh, look, this can happen that way. It doesn't always have to be in the office.
Tassie's killing it. Like everyone's loving Tassie at the moment.
Why wouldn't you?
I know.
It's one of the best places to be.
I hadn't been there until a few years ago. Yeah. And now I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. It's so cool.
Well, it's kind of funny because my friends in Melbourne, and they're like family to me as well, because I spent quite a bit of time there with them. But, I remember when I first moved from Tassie to Melbourne, or Sydney to Melbourne, and then I'd get the two-headed jokes, right?
Yes.
The Tassie two-headed jokes and blah, blah, blah. And fast forward 10 years, now it's my bucket list. It's my bucket list to come to Tasmania.
Yes.
I have not heard the two-headed thing for like so long now.
I remember I used to hear that a lot about Tasmania, and now all I hear with Tasmania is like amazing food, amazing wine, culinary experience. And the other thing as well, like I think Mona is doing amazing work. I love everything that they're doing. And I'm really keen for them. Was Dark Mofo on this year? I feel like it was. Yeah. So I'm very keen to get down and go to Dark Mofo.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that has changed, Hobart dramatically from a visitation point of view as well.
But the good thing is that because Tasmania is small enough, surely a lot of people that go to Hobart then tack on a trip.
They do.
Elsewhere.
Yeah. So, and you pretty much you can't drive anywhere without, from the north to the south without going through Lyons.
Yes.
So we are a critical component right through that area. And, as you talked about the wine, like we have some of the best wineries and whiskey distilleries if you're into whiskey.
Yep.
So Lark is
not
probably
into
the
whiskey, but I am into wine.
You're into wine. Well, it's a damn shame that we have so many in Lyons, and I feel it my utmost duty to actually visit all of them.
Yeah. No, thoughts and prayers. I'm so sorry about that for you. Okay, so now we're going to do some rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. What does the perfect Sunday morning look like for you, Susie?
Yeah, I pretty much do it now. So I go for a bike. I walk my dogs first. Always walk my dogs every morning.
Yep. How many dogs?
2. Yeah, 2 Maltese Shih Tzus. Very cute. Yes, very cute. One's about to turn 16 and the other one's just turned 12 months. So she's a handful.
Different ends of the spectrum.
They are very different at the ends of the spectrum. Then I go for a bike ride. Yep. And then I go for a coffee. We always, obviously, that's the whole reason why we go for a bike ride, for a chat and a coffee. And then after that, it's up to me. Well, at the moment, the last 3 years I've been campaigning after that.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, I like to relax at home. I like to spend time. We've got some beautiful sites, you know, Liffey Falls, walks and things that you can do around our area. It's just a gorgeous place to be.
Like, cook your roast?
Yeah, well, yeah. When I haven't cooked a roast
when you're not
quite
campaigning. Well, that sounds like a pretty good Saturday. Yeah. If you had a time machine, but you could only use it to visit historical events as a fly on the wall, which event would you choose to witness and why?
Yeah, the historical event would be John F. Kennedy's speech around ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Because I personally feel that sometimes we've forgotten about that.
Yes.
You know, if you're getting into politics, to me it's to serve, right? It's to serve your community, your electorate, your state, and then your country, you know. So I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's the whole point. Like, we're supposed to be – I totally agree with you. We're supposed to be, like, empowering the individual to be like, no, you get to help shape society as well. And it's not just supposed to be like, oh, someone else fixed the problem. It's like, no, and kind of to your point of, like, talking about community, the community can find the solution.
Yeah.
I think
some of that was stripped away in COVID.
Yeah,
you know,
so too.
And because
over-involvement.
and probably necessarily at the time.
Yes,
but it's how do we switch back now? How do we empower again?
Yeah.
How do we give that empowerment back to our communities? To
and reactivate them.
Correct.
What's your most hated chore?
Dusting. I will leave that sucker forever until I can see it. And if I've got visitors, I might do it. But other than that,
I don't think I ever dust.
Don't you?
No. Just everything's got a really thick coated layer of dust. So I can't share that one with you, but your house must look a lot nicer than mine, a lot shinier. Do you have any hidden talents or party tricks?
When I was younger, I could do the splits.
Oh, that's a great one.
I used to do that when I'd had a couple of drinks.
Yeah, good for you.
Just to show off. But I reckon I would do some damage right now.
When was the last time you did the splits, do you reckon?
I reckon it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Let's not try that live right now. We might leave that one. If you win, then we might try it. Then you can really hobble on into the lower house.
With a torn muscle.
Yeah. Okay, the final one. You can invite 3 people, dead or alive, famous or personally known, to a dinner party. Who are they?
Well, if I'm having a dinner party, I want to have some fun. So I love Kitty Flanagan. Love her to death.
Good
have
one.
So much in common with Kitty. You know, I'm single, got a cat and a dog, and I love her sense of humour. To couple with that, Michael McIntyre. He can make just the ordinary seem funny. You know, family life, everything. It's fantastic. He's a English comedian. Yeah. And then the other person would be Ryan Reynolds.
Oh,
yeah, because he is so cool.
He is cool.
And he also very similar personality, very good sense of very good sense of humour. Yeah. I get his sense of humour. Yeah. I think he's absolutely great.
Oh, I love that. That sounds like it's going to be a good roast.
Yeah,
good roast, lots of wine and a lot of laughing.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, yes. Oh, I love that. So I like to kind of close out every episode with the same question, which is, who is a woman that inspires you?
Well, I don't think being in Lyons, I could go past Dame Eden Lyons, who the seat is actually partly named after, obviously with her husband as well. But, you know, someone that was the very first person into federal lower House of Representatives, first into cabinet as a female and came from Tassie. Yeah. You know, so plus she raised 12 children. Yeah. You know, well, she had 12 children. Unfortunately, one passed away early and she raised 11. But, you know, that's just amazing accomplishment back in the, you know, in that time as well, where that was not a woman's place. No. You know, it certainly wasn't. So
trailblazer.
She was definitely a trailblazer and something I've got a lot to live up to if I win Lyons.
Yeah. Well, I hope you do. Thank you so much for coming on, Madam Speaker, Susie. I really appreciate it and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Authorised by C. Mortlock, Hilmer's Network Foundation Limited, Sydney.